Do you remember the famous Jeopardy moment with Cliff Clavin?
Yeah,
where
of course.
He didn't know the answer, and he goes, "Who's never been in my kitchen?"
Who are three people who have never been in my kitchen?
Right, right.
Technically was factually
Which
correct.
correct,
Yeah,
but that wasn't
what they were looking for.
What they were looking for. So the four of us, all four of us, if they say Mike Del Tufo, Chris Brockman, Rich Eisen, T.J. Jefferson, and that's the answer.
Okay.
Or that's the clue, and then the answer in the form of a question is, who are four people who have not interviewed for the Jets head coaching position?
I thought it was going to be who are three people who have never been on Mike's boat.
I mean, that's by the way, but that's true. But it's the four of us.
Four of us. Okay. Yeah.
Who are four people? Who are the only four people who have not interviewed for the Jets head coaching position?
I didn't want to tell you guys this, but
You got a call?
I'm not going to be here Monday.
Uh-oh. Apparently, they're interviewing Brian Flores, Josh McCown, and Jeff Hafley today.
Coach.
That's three more. Like, is Woody just sitting around? Is that what it is? He's just. Is he interviewing with all of them?
Time.
He's killing time until Monday.
Yeah.
How many have there been?
Get done before Monday.
I don't know. It seems like 30. I don't know. That seems like maybe too many, but
I don't know. Maybe Pelissero knows the actual number.
Tom, do you know the number?
Tom, do you know the actual number of the Jets head coaching interviews? What's the number?
Hold on. Let's go to the spreadsheet here.
Can we do like Jeopardy? Can we guess?
All right, you ready?
He's got a spreadsheet.
Can we guess?
Rivera, Vrabel, Rex, Matt Nagy, Aaron Glenn, Spagnuolo, Loxley, Rizzi, Ulbrich, Vance Joseph, Slowick, Arthur Smith, Flores, Hafley, McCown, and they still got Joe Brady and Joe Witt to go. So that would be 17 if they knock out all of those over roughly a 1 month.
17.
It's insane.
You're both hands in his second foot. That's Rex's way of looking at it.
Wow.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show, everybody.
Tommy P.
Good to see you. Say hello to the guys in the studio.
Hey, Tommy.
But that's what goes in studio.
I'm now hearing from people who say that's the favorite part of the segment.
Why wouldn't it be?
I mean,
Come on.
So go ahead, Tom. Go ahead. Say hi.
I also have never been on Del Tufo's boat, but I feel like from watching his Instagram that I have. I'm aware anytime he's on it.
Right. And you've been in his car, and you've been in his Fox booth.
Yeah, and
you know?
Yeah.
And you fed squirrels by hand, like he's taking you along for his life. We're all sitting shotgun with him in his Uber of life.
Squirrels are missing.
All right.
Sailing
Love you guys.
takes me away.
Tom Pellissero's here, everybody.
Tommy P.
17 Jets.
What's up, boys?
Oh, God.
What up, G?
What's up, buddy?
17 Jets
Go ahead and text you real quick.
interviews for the HC? And then how do you weed it down? Like, what?
What?
So here's what I would say. You can't do, first of all, you couldn't do Zooms with any of the coaches who were in wild card games until this week. And for the most part, the window that teams give you to interview their coaches, if they are in a wild card game, is at the back end of the week. So that's why you're seeing a bunch of these guys between McCown and Hafley and Flores, like they were all in games last weekend. This is the time to get around to it. So I don't want to say that they've been killing time with some of these other interviews, but certainly there's been an acknowledgement that we can't even do roughly half. It was roughly half of the interviews they had couldn't even take place until this week. And you can't do in-persons with anybody who is under contract with another NFL team until next week. And so the philosophy seems to be, just my opinion, from watching it from afar and from talking to people, is we've got time. Why not, if somebody thinks that they can pitch us and, make a compelling case for why they should be the person, all right, we'll hear you out. We've got the time to do it. So let's bring people in. They've had a lot of people, especially the GM candidates down in West Palm at Woody's place. They've had, other people on Zoom through the course of this thing. They've had some back up at the team facility. They've been utilizing their time. I would say this, by the start of next week, Rich, I think that, and I don't know the specific day, but I'd say, somewhere in the front half of next week, you're going to have a very clear idea. Here's the path we're going down. Not one person, but here's the handful of people we're going to bring in for each of these jobs. They're going to tell the other people those guys are out, and you're going to get a better idea of exactly what they intend to do. I think that it makes sense, honestly, under the current rules. I know that everybody laughs and why are they interviewing this many people, but the rules are set up in a way that you can't get face-to-face time with half your candidates until next week anyway. So talk to anybody that you've ever heard a good thing about, or someone's like, hey, you really should talk to this guy. I mean, Jeff Hafley was, the coach at BC, did a great job at the Packers defense. McCown's an up-and-coming coach who's going to have different opportunities in the coming years here. And Brian Flores has been a coach in your own division before. I think people will calm down once you start to zero in a little bit early next week. But really, this search is a function of the way that the rules are set up. There's different people you can interview at different times, and the Jets are interviewing all.
All right, so let's drill down. I'm going to go one by one here, and you could tell me who you think the leading candidate is. Seriously. No, seriously.
Well, I thought you meant the Jets. I was going to say that.
No. Well, I mean, we'll get to them in a second. I'll circle back to them, but I want to go alphabetical order in terms of jobs that are open right now and who you think is the leading candidate or who is the target that this organization would love to have over anyone else. And I go with the Chicago Bears first, Tom. Who's that?
Certainly believe, and I've said it for months, Rich, here and elsewhere, Ben Johnson. That's a job that intrigues him. I believe that he is at or near the top of their list. I think that that's a realistic possibility. I also think the way they proceeded with Mike McCarthy tells you that that's viewed as a really real candidate for them as well. They fly him and his wife up to check it out. They spent basically the whole day with him, went to dinner with him. It seemed like on paper more of a recruiting meeting than it was an interview, which makes sense when, that guy's beaten you like 19 times. You got a pretty good idea of what his resume is. I mean, Mike McCarthy gets kicked around in some circles, but he's made the playoffs 12 times in the past 18 seasons as a head coach. The Bears in that span have made it 4 times. It's a really accomplished coach. They've also interviewed a ton of people, Rich. They're still doing interviews here, but I believe both those guys are real candidates. And certainly, if Ben wants to go there, I think that's going to be a real consideration.
What about waiting for Marcus Freeman by the end of Monday night? Is that real?
I brought that up on game day morning last week. You got to get past this game. I think that there was at least a possibility if Notre Dame had lost last weekend, that Marcus Freeman might have interviewed this week. It's always been, something that people who know Marcus Freeman well say there's an interest level with him. I mean, he could win the national title Monday night, Rich, and basically have a contract for life at one of the iconic programs in all of college football. You win the national title. What else is there to do? I get the pressure every year of trying to, go and win another one. The Bears are one of the iconic franchises of the NFL. They drafted Marcus Freeman as a linebacker back in 2009, never played in an NFL game. Maybe gets the opportunity to coach one. I would not completely rule that out just yet.
All right, so let's move, even though it's not alphabetically in order. I want to save the big one for last. Jacksonville. Who is Jacksonville's target of choice that you think stands out?
Jacksonville's done, a half dozen interviews so far. Ben Johnson is definitely someone who is still in play for that job as well. I know there were people within the league who thought that was going to be the job that Ben Johnson would target. I'm not there right now. I'm not ruling it out, but I would not say, right now Jacksonville is clearly number one for Ben Johnson. I do know that, they loved Robert Saleh in that building when he was an assistant. He interviewed in person for the job. I would not rule him out as a possibility. They've talked to a variety of other people. They talked to Liam Cohen. They talked to Patrick Graham. That one still is a fluid process, I would say, at this point, Rich, which makes sense. The way that Shad Khan has operated coaching searches in the past, he's going to take his time here. But certainly Ben and Saleh are 2 names that I would keep in mind.
All right. What about New Orleans? Who's the favored candidate there for the Saints full-time gig?
There are definitely people who believe Aaron Glenn is the one. He was the runner-up to Dennis Allen a couple of years ago, and I think that if Dennis Allen hadn't been the guy who stayed and hadn't been sort of the hand-picked successor for Sean Payton, maybe Aaron Glenn would have gotten the job at that time. I know this. Aaron Glenn loves that city. He still has relationships with some of the older players on that roster. He knows that building. He's worked with Mickey Loomis. It would make sense if that's the job that Aaron Glenn wants, but he might have multiple opportunities. I would also not rule out Mike McCarthy for that job. I believe that he will interview for that job sometime, maybe the middle of next week. He worked with Mickey Loomis when he was the offensive coordinator 20 years ago, and Mickey was a young administrator who took over as the GM. There's a mutual respect between those two. Joe Brady's also talking to them here. But I would say Aaron Glenn, Mike McCarthy are 2 of the names to watch in New Orleans.
All right, now let's move to the Jets. Again, 17 names of people they interviewed. Does that include Vrabel? or you took him off that list since he's already
No,
taken a
Vrabel
job?
was the second one. We
Okay.
listed all of them there.
All right. So who do you think again that the Jets, out of all the people that they are turning these stones over? What do you think?
It's hard to get a read on the Jets, not just because of the volume of interviews, Rich, but also there's a lot of people involved in these interviews. Of course, Rick Spielman, Mike Tannenbaum are doing a lot of the football conversation, asking the football questions, but Woody is there for all of it. There's ultimately one guy who's going to make this decision. Everybody else is going to give input, but it's got to be who is Woody most comfortable with. I do believe that Aaron Glenn is a real candidate for that job. Again, we have to see if he's got multiple opportunities. Does he want to go to New Orleans? Does he want to go to the Jets? Does somebody else, maybe even Jacksonville, make him an offer? That's a possibility there. But I can't rule out really, most of the guys that they've interviewed here, Rich. I can't even sit here and rule out 100% Rex Ryan just because, his case is pretty straightforward, which is, hey, the glory years, 15 years ago. Remember that? That was fun. Everybody loved us then, Woody. It hasn't gone so great since I was out of here. Bring me back. Give me a shot. I don't believe that that's going to be the hire, but I can't rule it out because, again, ultimately one person is going to make this choice, and it's Woody Johnson, who, is at a stage in his life where he wants to figure this thing out. He tried a lot of things last year. He pushed buttons, whether they were the right ones or the wrong ones. He asked a ton of questions, which is his right as the owner. Rex is used to it. He knows that he can work and has won with Woody here. Again, I'm probably talking too much about Rex Ryan, but I can't rule out a whole lot of people for that job at this point, Rich. We'll get a better feel for that when they start cutting that thing down next week.
Who's the favored candidate in Las Vegas, Tom?
Rappaport talked about it last week. Certainly there is a high degree of intrigue with Ben Johnson. And Tom Brady has, studied everybody this year because he's been working in the booth. Ben Johnson said they first met before a game against Green Bay very briefly. Ben's clearly been, one of the top candidates over the last couple of cycles as well. I get the sense that he's more ready to take a job now. If it comes down to, offers or opportunities with three different teams, the Raiders, the Bears, and the Jaguars, which is the three interviews that he was willing to take, they've all got upsides and downsides on him. In Chicago, you have Caleb Williams in place. He's got a great deal of physical ability, but has not put it together just yet. You also have an established administration in terms of Ryan Poles being there as the GM, Kevin Warren as the president. Are you comfortable with that particular structure in Jacksonville? Trent Baalke, it appears, is not going anywhere. And Shad Khan believes in the roster that Trent Baalke has put together. You've also got a quarterback who's in place there in Trevor Lawrence, who he's been a roller coaster ride in terms of performance through his career, but you know what he is. And, Ben Johnson's taken over a former #1 overall draft pick who's had a little roller coaster career before, and it's worked out pretty well with Jared Goff in Detroit. And then in Vegas, you've got probably the hardest task ahead of you in terms of there's no quarterback. There's not a lot of talent on that roster, though. The short-lived GM, Tom Telesco, left some good pieces in place, led by Brock Bowers. You've got Max Crosby, whether that's somebody you're going to extend or potentially is he a trade pit chip somewhere down the line. But you've got a ton of unknowns. You've got a place that has not had stability. I believe Mark Davis wants stability, but he also wants to win. And he feels like, other than Jon Gruden, which, his hand was forced based on circumstances a few years ago, he hasn't gotten the right people in place. You're talking about taking over a team with no quarterback and a general shortage of talent on the roster in a division where you're going to be going up for the foreseeable future against Andy Reid, Sean Payton, and Jim Harbaugh. That's a lot. I would say that's the toughest task. But you also don't have a GM in place. You may have more influence in terms of the entire process and the putting together of the operation. You have a guy in Tom Brady who clearly is trying to sell Ben Johnson through intermediaries on coming to Las Vegas here and saying, hey, we can get this thing right, but I need you to be a part of the process. So you've got three different scenarios here. To give a shorter answer, yes, Ben Johnson is, I believe, the top candidate for the Las Vegas Raiders. They've got Robert Saleh in the building today. They had Pete Carroll in recently as well. I don't entirely know, if they don't get Ben, what the pivot is for Las Vegas, but certainly anticipate that they're going to have multiple plans here as they move forward and these things heat up in the coming days and weeks.
All right, Tom Pelissero, now the mother lode, the Dallas Cowboys. They target who? Who's their favorite? They're top of their wish list.
I hate to say I have no idea, Rich, because it's kind of my job to have an idea.
Right.
I don't know what the Cowboys are ultimately going to do. And I don't know that as recently as Monday morning, Jerry Jones believed that he'd be going headfirst into a coaching search without optionality with Mike McCarthy. I mean, we've talked quite a bit about what happened with Mike McCarthy in recent days. The short version of it is that Jerry Jones was not willing to make a commitment. All the conversations, they met for 3 days straight. I mean, hours upon hours, some of it with other people in the room. Sometimes it was just Jerry Jones and Mike McCarthy. And in those conversations, from my understanding, there was never a sense that Mike McCarthy was not going to be back as the Dallas Cowboys head coach. But Mike McCarthy wanted certain things to, be committed to here, namely, a type of contract that would not just give him, some level of security, but it's about his staff and it's about the families involved. And Jerry just wasn't willing to make a commitment, much less a long-term commitment that would have made Mike feel good about putting himself and his assistants and their families and everybody else involved through the same type of stuff they were last year when, by Mike McCarthy's own admission at his end-of-season press conference, there was a lot of stress on the families. When everybody's on a one-year deal and every loss feels like this might be the end of the line, that's really, really hard on people. So it came to a point by Monday morning that, it just appeared nothing was going to get done. And so Mike McCarthy at that point, wanted to focus on other opportunities. Jerry Jones obviously wasn't willing to make a commitment. And they kind of started from go here, figuring out, okay, what's coming next? And I don't mean to not, give Jerry credit. I'm sure he's thought through different things in different scenarios. I don't really get the sense that Deion Sanders is going to be the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Certainly those two have a relationship. I think there were a lot of reasons by Monday night that both sides would want that out there, that Deion's a possibility, because Deion's been in contract talks for weeks with the University of Colorado. And Jerry, I'm sure, was more than happy for people to be talking about Deion Sanders and not keep talking about what in the world happened with Mike McCarthy. There have been some other, possibilities discussed. They've got Kellen Moore that they're doing a Zoom with today. He's got history in the building as a player and as a coach. Somebody that they know really well. He was ready to move on a couple of years ago and now has experienced different things with the Chargers and the Eagles. I can't rule that out as a possibility. They've also got Robert Saleh coming in. I believe that interview is tomorrow. They've got Leslie Frazier coming in on Monday. And even Leslie Frazier, I don't think is a totally wild idea if the idea is we've got a team that can win now, but we also want to have a plan going into the future. In other words, if there's somebody else that you think is not quite ready, but that you want on staff, having somebody who can just solidify the building for a couple of years, whether that's Leslie, whether that's a Bill Belichick, whether that's a Pete Carroll, whatever it might be. Mike Zimmer's the defensive coordinator. Could Zim be a guy? He's won a ton of games in the league, and then also kind of use that as the bridge with a team you think can win right now instead of going through growing pains with a young head coach. All these options are on the table. What I would tell you is I don't get the sense we're going to wake up on Tuesday morning, Monday morning, and Kellen Moore is going to be the head coach of the Cowboys. I think this is going to be a little bit of a slow burn. I think that Jerry is going to look down a variety of paths here. He's got to come out of this with a win for him and for the organization, and that might take a little bit of time.
Well, you mentioned a couple names before I let you go. You mentioned Belichick and Carroll. There's Gruden also. Rank for me 1 through 3. Rank those guys in terms of the possibility of them landing any of these 6 positions we just mentioned over the last 15 minutes. Tom?
So we've got Gruden,
Belichick, and Pete Carroll. Yep.
And we've got Pete.
You got to rank them 1, 2, 3.
I mean, that's hard. So let me start with this. Jon Gruden, as much as people have focused on, well, he hasn't interviewed for any jobs, Gruden was never going to interview for jobs out of the gate. Really, any coach that accomplished, and that applies to some of the other guys too, the way that this thing is set up, it's going to take a while. You have to go through these different things, not just for Rooney Rule purposes, but based on the hiring practices and the guidelines, not being able to interview people who are in playoff games in person until next week. Even guys who didn't miss the playoffs, you can't interview them in person until next week if they're still under contract with teams. If Gruden's going to end up in the mix for any of these jobs, it's probably going to happen over the next couple of weeks. It was not going to happen to this point. In terms of Pete Carroll, you'd probably put him at number 1 just because he's actually interviewed for a couple of jobs. I don't get the sense, not ruling him out, but I don't get the sense that he's a primary candidate right now for Chicago. Could he be a pivot in Vegas after his interview there? I think that's possible. I thought Pete, if he had wanted to get involved last year, and if the Raiders hadn't been laser focused on Antonio Pierce, I think Pete quite possibly would have been in the mix for the Raiders job last year. That brings us to Bill Belichick. And I am acutely aware of what Mike Lombardi continues to post on every social media operation, saying the NFL is not an option. Bill doesn't want to go to the NFL. We laugh about the NFL. It's a joke to us. He only wants to be at the University of North Carolina. I also know Bill Belichick, who, for years with players and coaches, kind of had a rule. You're supposed to speak about yourself only. We've not heard directly from Bill Belichick on any of these things. The facts right now are he's gotten calls from teams. He did get a call from Tom Brady at one point. He has not signed a contract. That I know that's not unusual at North Carolina, but when I referenced a couple of weeks ago some of the questions about whether or not there would potentially be, whether Bill Belichick or a new team would even have to pay that $10 million buyout, that's what I was referring to, which was there's not a memorandum of understanding or a contract that's been signed by all parties here. And so there's some, a little bit of gray area in terms of how exactly that would apply. I don't know that any of these three are going to get jobs. If I had to rank it right now, I would probably put Bill Belichick number 3 out of 3, just because he has another job right now at North Carolina. I would say if you, Rich, using all your years, and I know that you talked with Bill a number of times through, the days at NFL Network, and you followed his career. And I would just say, when you look at all the photos of Bill Belichick wearing a dark suit and having his arm around some 16-year-old in a high school cafeteria while driving around the East Coast in a van, does that seem like what Bill Belichick wants to be doing right now? If he had his option, do you think he wants to be on the recruiting trail and trying to talk kids into coming to North Carolina, or do you think he wants to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys? I'm not saying that that's the focus. I'm not saying what he's doing in North Carolina is not real. And I'm sure Mike Lombardi will respond to this video when at the first opportunity that he gets a chance to. What I am saying is, if that call comes from Jerry Jones, we need you here for 2 to 3 years, I think that Bill Belichick would pick up the phone. We'll see if that call comes.
Tom Pelissero, everybody. In the 60 seconds I have left, Zay Jones playing? What do you think? I mean, pardon me, Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers playing? What do you think? Is Zay Flowers playing? It would be big news
if Zay Jones was
I know
playing. Zay Flowers, it's leaning not – it sounded like a long shot all week. I know John Harbaugh did not rule him out for the game when he spoke to reporters. But he hasn't practiced in 2 weeks. It seems like it's an uphill battle. You do have extra time. It's the Sunday night game. So, if they list him as questionable on the injury report, what that would tell me is they want to try to put him through a workout Saturday or even Sunday morning and just see, can you give us some snaps? He's one of your best young players. They're not going to do anything unsafe. The Ravens are, a team that definitely takes care of players on that. But John Harbaugh said many times in these situations, he trusts the players. They talk with the players about, what do you feel your body can do? Zay Flowers wakes up on Sunday morning and thinks he can go. If he hasn't been ruled out, I can't sit here and say it's 100% that he's not playing. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much, Tom. Greatly appreciate your 2 cents as always. We will see you Saturday and Sunday on NFL Network. Take care, brother.
Sounds good.
That's Tom Pelissero right here on the Rich Eisen Show. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.